Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BakuriBox12 here. Welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video. I've got YinYarn with me to help me out in this commentary over the entire Lost Halls. For those who don't happen to know, Lost Halls is the biggest endgame dungeon that we have so far, right after Shatters. It was released, hard to believe, almost a year ago now. I think we're coming up on 9-10 months, which is insane to me already. But it was being reworked for quite some time, was finally re-released in the form of Lost Halls 2.0, and I've been running them like crazy. Yin's been running them a lot. I'd say we've done like, what, give or take 20, 30?
Yeah, I'd say about that. 20, 30. Yeah, I'd say it's around that mark. 40 even, maybe. It's at this point, I feel like we've hit the mark for at least getting something worth of notice in there, but so far the luck has been a little dry.
Well, yeah, I think you've definitely run more than me because at first I was the one running them, and I don't even think I've run too many. I think after like you get to 5, you pretty much got the gist of it, but it's good to keep going for the loot. But once you got the server, I would see you in there for like hours after I got off. Like, I'm like, Yin, it's 5 a.m. and you're still running halls.
You know,
You like it?
once you run once you run one, I feel like you kind of understand what it's about. You know, the whole dungeon's very linear. You do it once and you pretty much understand almost the whole thing unless you weren't paying attention.
Right. You can get basically everything done in 2 runs. One is a void run, one is cult, and then you experience everything. It's pretty fair. You probably have to do a few more before you feel comfortable. Like, make sure your group is good, because I know some of those bosses can be tricky if you don't have proper cooperation, especially if you're not in a raid lead. That can be. I haven't even done a public halls.
Yeah, I can't even imagine doing a public halls. It's probably not as bad as we give it credit, but
Yeah.
uh, I feel like because when you do a group run and you're with people that know what they're doing and you're with a raid leader that's calling all the shots, everyone's in unison, there's a very big difference between that and just gunning it. And that can be said for pretty much anything in this game when it comes to end game dungeons or, anything like that.
Totally. It's like doing a Shatters your first couple of times where there's no cooperation and no coordination. You don't really know what you're doing, and so all of those enemy types can feel extremely overwhelming, and you don't know what to do, and it's really dangerous. But once you know about the dragging, sticking to walls, it becomes very simple and very strategic, and Halls is kind of like that too. Not quite to the same extent. I'll be sure to... We could talk about that later. I definitely have some things, but it's one of those things where there is a system to follow, and once you follow the rules, it becomes a lot easier. Still difficult, but not as stressful.
Yeah, and I feel like the dungeon itself has gotten a bit of an overhaul. Like, I mean, I know the whole entire dungeon is it feels completely new, but the layout, like the pixel art and everything has kind of changed. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, it feels like it's a direct upgrade. Honestly, looking back at the first version of the halls, it kind of feels a little unfinished now. I can kind of see in some areas it feels very rough draft-like. It was fine for whenever it was released, but you can kind of see it now whenever you compare the before and after. Refical and I were talking, and he brought up a good point that the first halls was very gimmicky, kind of for the sake of being this confusing, dangerous dungeon. The rats paralyzing you, also being able to hit rogues while they're invisible. That's such a kind of a troll thing to do in a way. Enemies respawning in previous rooms, dead ends, what else? Spooky Boy spawning in like the first room. All those things. Leading you in circles, everything looking the same. It's meant to be a confusing, treacherous place, but you kind of have to be careful with that, because if you just throw everything in the kitchen sink, it can feel more like a mess and not fun. And I think that's Lost Halls 2.0 does a good job at fixing that.
The whole thing about the first one and the second one is that the aspect of it being extremely linear is intact, but the whole point of it being a Lost Halls, and despite the fact that it's linear, that you can still get lost and wonder which direction to go, I think is the direction they were trying to take regardless.
Yes.
So I think that they did a good job on that. As for now, I think that the dungeon itself was just 2.0 made it very much more enjoyable. Surprisingly, the first one was even more, I guess, repetitive because the first one, the enemies were very samey.
That's one of the biggest, that was actually one of the first things I pointed out in, I think my first video I did on the halls was how there was finally enemy variety. That was, like, obviously the Lost Halls' whole motif and theme is to be monotonous visually because you're going through the same halls over and over. Where am I? Where am I going? Is this the right way? You can't tell. A cool little theme to try and create the illusion of confusion. That's cool and all, but eventually being lost in a game and it's like, okay, can we just get this over with? It gets on you after a while and starts to become more of a burden. But what Lost Halls 2.0 does that I really like is, one, like you said, it keeps the linearity, but it also removes dead ends. You don't just crash and burn. It's like, well, now we just got to turn around and enemies respawn. Then we got to deal with these again. No, if you reach a dead end, it's a pot room. Like, okay, now we're one step closer to maybe a cult. Or, you know, you find something. Here's the tea room. Here's Marble Defender. You always end up with something, even if you were led astray. And of course, like I was saying, the enemy variety. We have way more going on. I feel like 50% of the time in the old one, it was an Oryx room or a Crusade. That's like all it was. Like you would have some bats maybe and maybe some slimes, but there wasn't a whole lot going on. And Spooky Boy, he showed up way more frequently. I hardly ever see that guy now.
And in fact, he doesn't even try to sit on your character anymore. They changed that. They
that's
made it
right.
So, they made it so that instead of sitting on you, he just circles you, which I think is great because now you don't have to worry about him breathing down your neck, and you have at least some room to escape. And I think that's needed.
I forgot he teleports. So I guess that's to prevent him from getting stuck. So that way you actually have to dodge and fight him, which makes sense why they reduced the duration, make it a little more fair, more believable. So I get that. But yeah, everything hits hard, and health scales appropriately. That's a big one, a big reason why you saw swarms of 50, 60, upwards of 80 people going into bazaars opening keys before and lagging out and crashing, and that's how I lost my 8-8 wizard the first time. But now you don't necessarily need to do that. We have organized discords. You can even do it with a few people if you know what you're doing, because the health will go down accordingly. As a whole, the Lost Halls now has a lot more character than it did before, in both the enemy variety, little things changing, like now we have marble pillars in the opening room. You kill them to open up the next entrance. And one of my favorite additions is the introduction of room hazards, like ice, water, pure evil, those black pits that you can't walk across that look like just black abysses. I love that. Arrows shooting across the room, bombs, other towers that have status effects. It's a lot going on, and it makes it feel more like, kind of like you're going through a underground trapdoor with booby traps. I like that. And I think that it really adds to the charm of the Lost Halls, because even though they did help reduce the redundancy of going from room to room, it's still pretty much that. If you're doing a full cult run, you have to go through all the rooms, and it does get a little samey, but all of these little bells and whistles help reduce that.
Yes, I feel like, well, we both saw pictures before of what it was like, and we both lived it. I think that just the aesthetics of it look much better. They've done a great job on that. They just, despite it being samey, it's still much better than it was, so I think they did a great job. I did, however, want to go over with you what you think about the rewards for doing all this, though.
Sure, yeah.
Because the rewards are very on balance, whether or not they are worth the risk or not. Because some of the things in there feel like, maybe they could be worth it. There is nothing like a marble seal. Nothing, except for the marble seal.
Yeah.
So playing with that is fun, but is it worth the risk? Because the risk is huge, and if you're not in a very consistent group that knows what they're doing, for normal players that don't have things like Discord, that's a huge risk. So I wanted to
Totally.
ask what you thought about it.
Yeah, I think that in most forms, whether we're talking about bosses or enemies, whatever, Tea Room, I think that generally there is a pretty good reward for what you do. Sometimes, 2 mana from Void, obviously there are exceptions, but all of the enemies giving a good amount of fame is actually a surprisingly good reward for all of this.
Mhm.
I really like how even if I get Jack from the bosses, which thankfully hasn't happened yet, I still can say, I got 120 fame from this Halls run, and I am closer to my next star rank. That's cool. But even so, even if, take that into account, there are like 4 different bosses here. You've got the Marble Defender who drops a pot. You have 5 different pot rooms with the flames that can also drop pots. The Agonized Titan Treasure Room boss that drops a potion and a chance at the ST Trickster set. Marble Colossus, which typically drops life, at least 1. Sometimes I got an attack and a death, which was unfortunate. You got the Void, whole different thing there, and the Cult. So there's stuff around every corner, which I really like, because before, Marble Defender wasn't even a thing, which is another thing that I'm really glad they added. One of the things that I thought Lost Halls was going to be was a lot of secret rooms that you would stumble upon. Like, I think even now, something that would be cool to add is maybe like a random chance, kind of like a treasure room spawning, have a little destructible wall off to the side that acts as maybe a shortcut to a flame room or a different room entirely with a chest, or maybe it could be kind of like in the Shatters where it's a secret switch. Instead of needing to get all 5 flame rooms, you can find a secret one that counts for one of them. I've always liked that off to the side, secret, not always there, you gotta look for it sort of thing, because it adds variety and adds depth to something that you didn't know was there before. And I really like that kind of stuff. Was there anything that you thought would be in the Lost Halls that they didn't add?
Yeah, well, something like that, because you're speaking of terms of like a Gauntlet Legends or like a Zelda, where there's something that you didn't even know was there, but until you searched.
Yeah,
So
crack in the wall.
it's, it's something that unless you really gave it, careful look through, you would never know, which I think would be a great addition too, because that would very much so break the samey way that the dungeon goes.
Yeah.
I think that also in terms of treasure rooms and stuff like that, there definitely needs to be maybe floor panels that are dangerous.
Hmm.
Think about like an Oryx room where you see like maybe it's a little bright and there's flames on the floor that come up every 5 seconds, or spikes,
Oh, spikes would be cool.
something like that, right? Where it's not just the enemies, but the dungeon itself is out to get you, you know?
Yeah, that's why I like all of the room hazards. It's kind of like that, but I see what you mean. As far as difficulty is concerned, I think this is sort of a big point before we move into bosses. Clearing a Lost Halls, do you consider it to be difficult whenever you're in a group of people mowing down enemies? Because one of the biggest factors of Lost Halls that people love is that it's raid-like and that it forces everybody to play a part. You have tricksters sending in decoys to distract the crusade. You have one guy off to the side if Spooky Boy comes in who's distracting him. You have knights to stun the grotto blobs, huntresses to throw out slows and paralyzes, and pallies and warriors, of course, to buff, and priests for healing. But at the same time, whenever you have all of those people working together, it does naturally take away the difficulty because you're doing it correctly. What do you think about that? Do you think there is a way to achieve that perfect balance of working together to reduce difficulty? Or do you think it kind of defeats its own purpose? Because I myself don't even know how to answer this question. It's always bugged me.
It's been a question that I've actually asked myself before, and I feel like this is where casual play versus professional play is a huge factor.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there was these dungeons, they already, they knew that people were going to get together, figure this dungeon out, make it very, repetitive. They knew it was going to be the same. But to people that have never joined in Discords, to people that have never figured this out, kind of gone through it, they go in and they're all amazed, and they all think, wow, like, what's going on? And then they slowly learn over time what needs to happen. They see, oh, wait, I'm a trickster. I can go send this decoy in. This is going to help the team. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that can happen with, because obviously me and you both know, hop in a Discord. Everyone knows what to do. Trickster, you decoy here, night stun these guys. Not everyone's going to know to do that.
The reason I ask this is because the biggest complaint about Lost Halls beforehand was that, yeah, everything hits really hard and it's so many enemies, but it's boring after a while because you're going through all those rooms for people, and that's actually why Nidowig's not here. He doesn't like the dungeon. He likes the bosses, but he doesn't like the dungeon because he finds it boring to keep on just sitting there, essentially in a fame train, and killing enemies going through until you get to the boss. Is there a middle ground that we can reach where we can make a game involve that sort of teamwork without it being boring? Because I think I think that the Shatters did that pretty well. I think that the Shatters is probably like my second or even my number one favorite dungeon in the game, just because of how many little things there are in it that allow you to play it differently. It's not just about combing through these hordes of enemies. There's a little bit of stealth involved. You have to hug the walls to avoid them. You have to get the secret switch to, now you don't have to get the third switch with all of those enemies in that huge room. There are safe spots that you can stand, like for the stone mages to not get hit by all those attacks. Random spawns to make it slightly more difficult and more challenging. Drag enemies one by one. Different classes, like say you have a Staff of Esben, and you can move, your shots can go around walls to hit switches. Breaking through the dirt and then finding enemies in there. Having a rogue go in, or actually probably not if there are towers, but having a trickster go in to teleport, get the switch, and then come back safely. There are a lot of different ways to play it. It's not just kill enemy, move forward, kill enemy, kind of like on your way to third boss, ironically, but first and second switch have a lot going on that diversifies the dungeon from just being, again, raid-like. And I don't know if there's a way to make Lost Halls like that, because let's be honest, every dungeon kind of follows what Lost Halls is, just on a way smaller scale, like an Undead Lair. You go from room to room, kill enemies until you get to the boss. But at a certain point of maxing your character, you don't need to fight them all. You could just rush. So we don't notice that it's the same, but because Lost Halls is so dangerous, you do take it one step at a time. And I don't know how we can... That's just kind of the nature of this game and a lot of other RPGs, especially MMOs. I don't know if you think that there's a way we can help accommodate both players, because even we, as much as we enjoy this dungeon, we're still like, yeah, a full cult run, all 5 flames, we've cleared this entire dungeon, I'm pretty exhausted, that's tiring. Is there a way to mitigate that? I don't know.
Well, I don't really know if there's a way either, because the thing is once again, like I said, they made it so that because they knew we were all going to come together and form this way. I'm not quite sure myself if they could figure out a way to make it casual based too, because I don't think that's what they were going for.
Yeah.
I think that they, and the problem is that you're right. It does get very, very repetitive because we've seen this all before many times. But what difference is that from a UDL? Really?
Right, the speed at which you complete it.
And it's the very same, different rooms. Maybe there's different enemies in a certain room, but you're still, completing it just at a much slower pace. Yeah. So I feel like things that you can't interact with would make it much better. See, like and they would be randomly placed as well. So like, let's say that you're in a castle and there's a sentry here. You can't hit it. It's invincible, but if you stand close to it, it's going to zap you for a lot of damage.
Right.
That in itself adds more fear because you don't know where it's going to be. You can't defeat it. Your group just has to find a way around it, which would play into something like a Shatters thing, like second switch. There's always something new. I feel like things that just have to do with the floor, with the wall, things shooting out from the wall, things like that, could even just small things like that could make things much more scary, because because that's never going to be the same. Just like how the enemies are never the same either. But here, it's stuff you can't defeat, no matter how many people you have, no matter how grouped you are, no matter what. You
Hmm.
just have to dodge on your own. And that actually brings me, if you wanted to, I could start talking about the Marble Colossus here if you are willing.
Yeah, we could probably move on to bosses now, just to like finish off the thoughts with that. I think once the game gets ported over to Unity, a lot more possibilities will open up in terms of game mechanics too.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these ideas, obviously something like the floor lighting up a different color and being like fire or spike is possible now, but I imagine it'll be a lot easier and there will be more to it once we have a more functional engine. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's a again a question I don't even know how to answer, but I thought I would propose it because it's always on my mind, and I'm like I think this is just the nature of Realm. Whenever it comes to dungeon grinding, I think that's just how it is, and I don't know how to change it. But maybe one day we will. But yeah, I think now is a good time to move on to the bosses because ironically, that problem of being boring is completely reversed whenever it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
bosses. All of these bosses are a blast to fight, and they're never boring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you want to start with Colossus, or I guess we'll do Defender first, technically.
Yeah. Defender, you know, when it first came in, I wasn't really sure how to feel about it, especially after fighting it the first time, because there is very, very uh, minimal adrenaline rush when fighting that boss.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dodging the arrows, right? But if you're in a team, once again, this falls into that same category that knows what they're doing. Once you get past that first part, you just stand in the middle and you just let it die.
Mm-hmm.
There is almost nothing that goes on with that. I feel like almost anyone can beat that thing as long as you just follow the lines and have the right speed.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you see it differently. How do you see it?
Yeah, in ways, I was kind of like you, where I felt a little bit underwhelmed by it. It's not very strong, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad they did that because it precedes the Marble Colossus, and I wouldn't want to go through a pretty difficult fight, followed by an even more difficult fight, and then
Mm-hmm.
followed by a really difficult fight with the Void. What I really like, though, is how it's just this wall of swords and arrows coming your way. It's I mean, just arrows coming out of the wall screams classic Indiana Jones booby trap type deal, which is always really nice to see in games. But the fact that there's like this small window of error, like you said in that first phase, you have to move with the shots or else you're going to take massive damage, and it silences you, so you can't. Well, in my case, I always bring a priest, so I can't heal myself, which means I have to dodge it. But like you said, after that first phase is over, people just stand in the middle. I used to dodge it, and then I'm like, I don't need to. So then I just stay in the middle and fire away. I think what would be a good way to address that if they wanted to make the fight a little more serious and not just an obligation would be to make the arrows stun you. So that way you
Yeah.
can't attack the boss unless you dodge. I think that would be because the fight wouldn't realistically be that much more difficult, but you would have to try. It would be more than a one-phase fight. I think that would be an easy and necessary change, and I don't think that it would make it too difficult or unbalanced or that much easy either. So I like the fight. Otherwise, it's cool, nice little tame precursor to the Marble Colossus. So I think
Yeah.
it's nice. But yeah, that leads us to the Marble Colossus, which compared to before is easier and more difficult in some areas. It's interesting. I actually didn't think when Halls 2.0 came out that they were going to rework the bosses because I thought that they were already pretty good, but they've managed to make them all better in most ways.
If I had to say anything about Mr. Colossus, it's that the first time doing it, I didn't know what to expect, but I feel like I almost died several times the first time doing it. There was some things that were added that once again, because I wasn't a very big doer of the first version, so I had zero idea of what was to happen. And I think the first thing I noticed where it was really different was when I saw those marble bits, those yellow circles come out. I yeah, then I started to notice, oh, this isn't a joke anymore. It never really was, but I was just glad to see that I at least gotten something different. And I think at this point I must have done Marble Colossus at least 30, 40 times. Um
Yeah.
Chance of loot still low as ever. The
Of the whites.
the
Yeah.
Yeah, the whites. I mean, just the normal stuff is you'll pretty much always get it. I feel like soulbound at this point is nearly guaranteed if you're not
Yeah,
sleeping.
that's something that I really like. In ways, it's like, you want to have to try to hit him, but you don't want to just like hit him once and get soulbound. You want to feel like you earned it. But that was what I hated about Halls before, and why I didn't recommend it in like any of my videos, because I would never get loot, no matter what class I was on. I brought warrior, wizard, priest, nothing would ever get loot. And ever since 2.0 came out, I've got loot every time.
I did the same thing. I ran it maybe once or twice in the old version. I never got anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was like nothing existed. But the Marble Colossus now is much more fair. It's a lot more team based because you need priest healing you,
Yeah.
paladin buff, warrior buff, the same that you would kind of expect anywhere else. But this time around, the Marble Colossus has things circling it, certain phases that you have to dodge in certain ways. Some of it is very RNG based, and let me explain that for a second, because like the tentacles go in certain ways and then rotate, and sometimes the coin going around isn't in your favor,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of just have to wait it out. And there's not really, I don't think there's a way they can really fix that, because the coin's moving in a pattern and him twisting, you kind of expect it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not really much you can do. So I still think it's fine. Dodge for a bit, then do it. I'm fine with that. That's really the only real RNG I can think about it, besides the towers sometimes being very bad, which is fine. Like, Daze towers are
Yeah.
some of the worst.
Weak.
Darkness towers suck too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Weak, yeah, especially. So sometimes you get the bad end of the stick. Pet stasis can be a problem.
I think they did a good job at balancing the new fight. Before, it was quite difficult. It was you could easily die in it if you walked too far to the left or right and got hit by a whole bunch. What I like is how they added the new silence ability, so to where you're not quieted. So once the silence is over, your mana's not gone, allowing priests to heal more effectively if they can dodge well, or even if they get hit. There's some more leniency there, and there's not nearly as much pet stasis. Before, it was filled with it, constantly getting pet stasis. You needed to bring like 20 priests to survive unless it was a very coordinated group. But now it's a little more lenient, but doesn't feel extremely easy or difficult. I think it's not to say it's a average fight. It's difficult for sure, but it doesn't feel like it leans too far in one direction. I think that overall they did a good job with that, especially with the tentacle phase, because you remember the 2.5 minutes of dodging. Yeah. I was one of the few people that like didn't hate that. People were like, this is unfair, this is so long. I'm like, yeah, it is difficult though to stay, because you have so much to dodge. There is a lot of bullet hell elements in this fight, but 2.5 minutes is a long time, and I get that, and you're just kind of waiting, and that feels very stagnant, and people don't like that. But with the addition of the marble core that now flies around the room, I think they actually made a smart move with that, because now, as long as you can destroy it, once that marble core is dead, that phase is over. So you have a greater sense of control over it. You're not just dodging for 2.5 minutes. You might be, if it takes you that long, but you know that your actions have consequences, positive or negative. And that's just another way of balancing out the fight in our favor. So overall, I think it's a really good fight. Like, would you give it your like top 10? Would you say it's in there?
Yeah, I'd say so. I feel like, well, because really, what are you competing against? John Bilgewater?
Again, like the halls itself, I think there were more phases added here, more variation in his attacks. He has those giant paralyze lightning bolts. Then he has blue ones later on. The towers even changed to suit the void fight. He's got those huge like electrical stars he shoots out that wave and paralyze you. Tricksters are very helpful in that phase to not get sat on. It's, again, easier in some parts where I felt like it was a little too extreme, like too much pet stasis, or he's, I don't know, just too many bullets at one time. But also keeping it difficult to where you have to cooperate and dodge, of course. Because you can easily die in there if you're not careful, walking through the tentacles, obviously. Good fight overall. I like it. I think it's an improvement, and it's fun.
Well, I'd say before we move on to the granddaddy, the finale, how about the cultist hideout?
Yeah, we'll regress back over there to the 5 pot rooms that you find throughout. We already said it, but collecting all 5 of the flames is a little draining by the end of it. So I think that would be cool if they incorporated like some shortcuts, kind of like a secret switch in the shatters to help speed that up a little bit. Like only a certain class can get it. Now, you don't have to reuse the whole teleport with the trickster thing across tiles, but maybe only an Oreo paladin can make it, like with invincibility. But yeah, the Agonized Titan itself, the treasure room boss, is also like the defender, fairly simple. He just hits a lot harder.
Yeah,
and he's
for sure.
Pretty unchanged from before. Shoots a bunch of projectiles around him, and with long range and a priest, he's very simple. Melees, I imagine. I actually don't even know how to fight him. I haven't tried.
Yes, I prefer using melee when I do Lost Halls, but that is the one boss where I sometimes try to regress my decision. I have had experience fighting a melee. It's not terrible.
Yeah.
But as soon as he starts reaching the half HP mark, I get out. I leave. I don't stay in there. I don't even stay in there for a second. Because those stasis shots from the flames, the tentacles are so close together that they're going to hit you because they last for so long. And each of those shots do around, not the stasis, but the tentacles, I want to say do around 200 plus damage.
Yeah.
Even on a melee, that's going to hurt.
Yeah, ridiculous. But aside from that, pretty simple fight, which again, I think is a little bit more difficult than Marble Defender, but is a good precursor to the Cult fight. As for the Cult, which is I really like how it's a different area entirely, which is pretty cool. It means you can't do Marble and Cult in the same run, which was intentional, so that way you can't do all 4 bosses at once, which I get. But it is nice how it's like this fairly straight shot to the end, just clearing enemies. I actually find the Cult, like clearing the Cult, to be a lot easier than the halls itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the enemies don't annihilate you. They don't have these instant kill shots. If you sit on some of them, yeah, they're gonna, of course, but it's a lot faster, a lot easier, and you can teleport. Someone can rush it, and they can get to the end, and you can just TP.
For sure. And the bosses don't disappoint in that aspect either.
Mm-hmm.
It's just them times 10.
Pretty much, yeah. All of these are like mini cultists that we fight leading up to it with all of their elemental powers. That's true, there's 5 of them. These could represent the 5 elements.
Yeah, darkness is a little iffy, though.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Elements, I guess. What really stood out to me was, I'm a sucker for colors, of course. I love whenever things just kind of pop and mesh. So this fight really just visually pleases me. I like seeing all of the shapes with different colors fly out.
I enjoy whenever I get there and fight them. The one thing that always just gets to me is the 3-shot phase and the 5-shot. You know, as a knight, you can stun them. They're all stunnable. But there's always going to be 4 others that can shoot your way. And some of those things will fly at the speed that your character goes at. So it's very hard to dodge.
Always be moving, pretty much, is the best advice for that fight. Don't clump up and just keep moving.
But when you know what you're doing, the fight itself is actually pretty fun, because even if you're bad at dodging the 3 or 5 shots, they give you the grace of giving you pillars that you can stand behind.
What I like about all 3 of the main bosses is that you're always moving. Very rarely do you just stand still. There are some cases in Colossus and very rarely in the Void, and sometimes in Cult as well, but for the main phases, you have to keep on moving, and I like whenever there's that flow, and you take them down one by one, and for each mage that you get rid of, for each cultist you get rid of, the fight kind of gets a little bit easier, and then, okay, all 5 are done. Next phase, minion, spawn, dodge, kill that. Watch out for those really fast attacks that come out of nowhere. There's a degree of chaos, which I like about it, without being super unfair, because there's a lot of bullets, but they're all together, and they all move in a straight line.
Yeah.
So it's like, whoa, that's a lot, but I can handle it. That's what I like about Cult. And the loot is very consistent. I've got 3 life and a mana from there before, and an Unbound Death. Like, there's good. I can always rely on it to give me at least 1 or 2 life. I don't think I've ever got 2 mana from it. I don't know if you can, maybe. Wouldn't put it past them.
It's not the hardest thing. It's just very, very long.
Mm-hmm.
The Cult process of clearing the whole dungeon, practically doing the treasure room, doing the cultist hideout, and then getting to the Cult, fighting the Cult, fighting the cult phases of the demons, killing them, then you get your whatever life mana. That is a very long process, and that is the hardest part, is just getting through all that.
Yeah, Cult overall, I like it, but it is a little draining to get all 5 flames. Maybe if there was a little speedy trick to get that done faster, I don't know. But overall, I like it. I love the boss, and I love the Necro set that it drops. And that leads us to the grand finale of Realm, the Void. The Void entity. And I gotta say, what a fight. I know I hyped up the difficulty for you because my first run was extremely stressful. But would you say that this is, aside from Killer Bee Queen, because that is a different beast, would you say this is the most difficult fight in the game?
Yes. Yes, for 100%.
Yeah, I would say so too.
And that is why I love doing it.
Yeah. Like before, you have to know how to divide up your groups. I think actually going in 4 groups is a little more detrimental unless you have a lot of people. I think that the 2 groups was working out really well for us.
I've never done a 4 split, but from what I've seen, I feel like a 4 split would actually work better. And this is just because I feel like I have seen times where one of the groups will just forget about the downward minions, and they'll grow and they'll build and they'll just pop on the group and just either cause them to nexus or merge, which you never ever want to do in a Void. You never want to be in one group, ever. Here's what I like about it so much. It's super hard.
Yeah.
And you can't beat it unless you're good at the game.
Yeah.
Because you have to dodge bullets that do 300, 200 plus damage, some armor pierce, all the time, the whole time. If you don't dodge one, you might get silenced. And if you're a priest, that's it. Not always, but sometimes. If you keep letting it consecutively happen, you just won't survive. So you have to know how to dodge. You have to be a team player. You have to know how to, use your ability at the right time, because there are wrong times to use your ability. And, like if your mana is all the way up, just use your ability, because there's no reason to just let it sit. Yeah. Because you're either going to get quieted or silenced, and then when your group is slowly dying, you're going to be like, oh, why didn't I just heal everyone?
Yeah, it's true. It's a conscious thing I have to make happen. I'm like, oh, I'm at full. As a priest, if I'm at full mana, you heal anyway. Like, it doesn't matter if you think people are totally fine. Just heal anyway. And especially whenever I have prod on, it gives me armor. So now if I take damage, I'll take less. That is really the great thing about the Void. It's constant, but it lets up sometimes to let you catch your breath in between phases, and then hits you even harder. It's like, okay, here we go, final phase. And I love that about a boss. It's intimidating. His sprite is really cool. They gave him almost like, kind of looks like nether soil, but purple on the ground.
Very ethereal.
Yeah, it's better than the Shatter's Bridge, I think. I can see things, ironically, better, even though the color is closer. I don't know why, but yeah, I like it aesthetically more than the previous fight. And it starts out pretty tame. Like, the first half of the fight is fairly manageable. Like, okay, this is hard, I gotta dodge. Especially whenever he's circling around the room for the first time. You can get... I've seen so many people just die to that first shotgun, melees mainly, because they're standing right there. But then after that, the minions start spawning. Clearing minions is very important. Then focusing the boss. He's got his Star Wars attack. He's got his... They call them fidget spinners. I don't want to say that, but that's that's what they call it. The shuriken attack. The big ones. Really, the most difficult part of the Void is, you know what I'm talking about, the second to last phase, where he splits into 4 and all now ends. And then, even after that, whenever you beat them, then he starts... What is it? You kill all 4 of them, and then there's one in the middle and one going around?
I'm not sure if it's... I still think it's 4 going around. I could be wrong. Because at that point, I'm paying attention to the middle, because he does do those big glob purple shots. It basically is the same exact thing that you just did, just with that added to it. And with some extra minions.
I remember that terrified me, because I assumed after you killed all 4 of them, that was going to be it. Like, yes, the phase is over. Now do it again, only it's a little harder. Only, I don't think you have to kill all 4 of them, right? You just have to outlast it.
Yeah, they're all dead already. It's the
Yeah.
middle one that you have to just destroy. And if you're not fast enough, it repeats that shot pattern again. So that's why they pressure you in Discords to just get him dead as fast as possible.
Oh, I know. That phase, you can see it in my first Void fight video. Like, I am just trying, I'm not even hitting the boss because I'm trying to process all of these shots. Like, I'm dodging the big swirly shots. Like, okay, I gotta dodge the shuriken, but also focus minions and heal. And, whoa, okay, random silence shot came out of nowhere. Those long Star Wars shots that we've called them, they just kept getting me. They're so fast. It's like trying to dodge a close-range Colt shot. That's easily the hardest part of the fight and what makes it so difficult. And afterwards, it's always a breath of fresh air. It's always a sigh of relief, like, yes, I did it. The end of the Void is, I remember whenever that first came out, everybody was talking about it because it's really cool how he, at first I thought he was just showing illusions of like everything, all of the bosses that we fought. Like, oh, this is everything leading up to this point. But if you read the chat and from other people have pointed out, the theory is that he was the one possessing everything. He is in everything. He is this entity that has plagued Oryx's realm in a way. And he's the final boss.
He's everything that was associated with pure evil. If you've noticed, in the shatters, the purple water, that's pure evil. The nest was crafted from bees that were merged with pure evil. As said in the documents that Dr. Terrible left behind on his computer. The Marble Colossus is an obvious one.
Esben, the voice from beyond.
Yeah, Esben.
Hand of Zil is something different, right?
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole different beast that's going to be explored at some point.
Holy, there's another one.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
That's crazy. That's exciting, though. Would you say that this is your favorite boss fight? Or are there others you prefer? Or is it, at the very least, really high up?
I've thought about it before. I feel like the Void is something that fit this very well. I'd say that it probably is currently my favorite boss in the entire game, yes.
Very nice. Yeah, the only thing left to talk about is the glorious loot that you can get from here, which I've done a video on, not in depth per se, but I've talked about the items before. There's a lot. That's what I love about it. There are a lot of items, and they're all good.
That you might not get.
Yeah, you might. I haven't gotten any yet, but that's the beauty. There's not a single one I don't want. People are like, potato. I'm like, 6 stats to attack, def, dexterity, and speed. It's not bad. Yeah, sure, you don't get any health and mana, but maybe I want more DPS and more movement capabilities. It's still giving me def. You really like the new tops. That's like what you have in your sights, right?
Yes, I love that stuff because it's like classic Realm, just with it's new. You know.
And then of course that Necro set I want so much because that staff is insane and so weird in the best of ways. The skull looks great and has a cool effect of cursing, and that ritual robe is really good on not just Necro but mainly Sorcerer because of the 15 wisdom. Yeah, I definitely want to get my hands on that. And even the bloodshed ring, it's kind of like a pyramid ring, but for wisdom. Aside from the tops, is there any items in particular you're after?
You know, Omni, for bragging rights, is really the only reason. I feel like Bow of the Void is something that would be fun to use. I don't see it really taking place of a Doom Bow. It's just something to be like, oh yeah, I have this. Quiver of Shadows, on the other hand, is... I'd love to get my hands on that. Think about that. You sit up right at Setheno. How much damage do you do if you fire 5 shots?
I imagine that will make low-level dungeon farming a lot faster.
100%. Marble Colossus, you know, the items, Marble Seal, as I said before, it's something that is like no other seal, so... if it's something you'd want, you know, obviously that's a very big group play item, but if you're into Discords, like, you know, doing all the shatters and stuff or Lost Halls, you would want that seal.
Definitely. I think overall, Lost Halls 2.0 is, as we've said, a big improvement over its predecessor and a very nice endgame dungeon. It's the first of its kind being all raid-like, so you just go nuts attacking everything. And while we've expressed our gripes with that sort of style and how it can be fatiguing for a lot of people, some people don't mind it. Some people like that sort of long grind, gives a lot of fame, a lot of potions, and even if it's not your thing, the bosses are more than worth it. That's why we do it. That's why we run halls, because we like the bosses so much, and the items that we could get are fantastic. So overall, it's good.
Yeah, as much as I didn't really do the first one, the second one opened my eyes to it. It's made me actually want to do it. Enemy choice is much better, a little more, distinctive than it was before. Visually, it looks much more appealing. And even if the whole dungeon itself wasn't that aesthetically pleasing, the bosses 100% make up for every little gripe that I might have. And the gripes were little; they were very minuscule. I'd say that the makers of this dungeon did a very good job, and I'm glad that I can finally run it with joy in my heart. Very just good experience, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. And that is the Lost Halls, pretty much. It's big. It's endgame for sure. It's cool, and I'm glad it's here, because it leads to more possibilities later down the road. I can't imagine where they're gonna go from here. Only time will tell.
Hopefully, they can only improve from here.
Yes, hopefully. Although I imagine it'll be a little bit before they release another big dungeon like this. Maybe they'll surprise us, though. Who knows? All right, that about does it for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. All right. See ya.